Imagine a skyscraper of steel piercing through the dense emerald canopy of the Amazon rainforest. At its peak, a massive water tower gleams under the equatorial sun, proudly displaying the cursive script of the Ford logo. It is not rusted or abandoned. Below it lies a bustling necropolis of glass and concrete, where the hum of electric cars drowns out the call of macaws. This is the capital of the Amazon. This is the world where Henry Ford won.
Welcome to an alternative timeline, a reality where, in 1927, the American industrialist did not just buy a piece of land, he successfully conquered nature itself. In our history books, we know Fordlandia as a ghostly failure, a place where the jungle reclaimed the dream. But let us pause the decay for a moment. Let us imagine that the deadly leaf blight fungus, Microcyclus ulae, was defeated by American chemistry in the late 20s. What would that world look like?
It starts with a deal that sounds like fiction. Henry Ford purchased 10,000 square kilometers of Brazilian rainforest. To put that in perspective, that is a territory roughly the size of the state of Connecticut, or almost half of Wales. He paid a symbolic price for the land itself, promising the Brazilian government 7% of the future profits. But Ford was not interested in just extracting rubber for his tires. He was not merely building a plantation. He was building a new civilization.
In this vision, ships did not just bring saws and axes. They brought an entire city packed in crates. Imagine fleets arriving up the Tapajós River carrying prefabricated houses, hospital equipment, power generators, and bright red fire trucks. In the middle of one of the most hostile environments on Earth, Ford laid down paved roads, built schools, and installed modern plumbing. He even constructed a pristine golf course and a swimming pool, strictly divided down the middle to separate men and women, enforcing his rigid moral code upon the tropics.
This was the Michigan Way transplanted to the equator, a sober, industrious utopia where the chaotic rhythms of the jungle were replaced by the ticking of a time clock. If the dream had not rusted, this would have been the seed for a corporate state, a place where efficiency ruled over biology. But as we look at the rotting water tower today, we have to ask, how did a man who revolutionized the entire world with the Model T failed so spectacularly against a single fungus? To understand the collapse, we have to look at the hubris of the beginning.
The breaking point was not the malaria or the exhausting heat. It was the cafeteria. By 1930, the tension in the dining hall was thicker than the humidity outside. Ford's nutritionists, sitting comfortably in Michigan, had decided that the Brazilian laborers needed a diet of champions. Instead of their traditional fish and roasted manioc, the workers were forced to line up for sticky oatmeal, canned peaches, and dry whole wheat bread. It was a slap in the face. When the new self-service system was introduced, forcing proud men to wait in line like schoolchildren, the pot finally boiled over.
History records the quebra panelas, or the breaking of the pans, as a riot that sent American managers fleeing for their lives into the jungle. But in this version of reality, Henry Ford was ready. The screams of "we want meat and liberty" were not met with retreat, but with the cold steel of Ford's service department. This wasn't just a car company, it was a sovereign state. Heavily armed private security forces, authorized to kill to protect company property, surrounded the cafeteria. The riot didn't result in anarchy, it resulted in a purge. The ringleaders weren't just fired, they vanished into the green abyss of the rainforest, never to be seen again.
With the rebellion crushed, the corporation turned its eyes to the so-called Island of Innocence. This was a small settlement just outside the town limits where workers would sneak off to drink cachaça and visit brothels.
everything Ford despised. In our timeline, Ford had to tolerate it. In this darker timeline, he burned it to the ground. Under the guise of sanitation and public health, enforcement squads raided Highland, smashing bottles and leveling the shacks. The message was brutal and clear. There was no escape from morality. You were either a Ford man 24 hours a day, or you were an enemy of progress. The psychological breaking of the workers was completed through the clock. For centuries, the people of the Amazon had respected the midday sun, taking a siesta to avoid the lethal heat. Ford declared this laziness. The whistle blew at 9 in the morning and released them at 5 in the afternoon. Men were forced to tap rubber trees and clear brush during the scorching equatorial noon, their bodies breaking down under the strain. Those who collapsed were accused of drinking and were deported. Those who survived were fueled only by brown rice and fear. The vibrant culture of the Amazon was silenced, replaced by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of an American factory, grinding away in the heart of the jungle.
Kinematographic storytelling, detectiveness rascaze. Henry Ford looked at the chaotic Amazon rainforest and saw a disorganized factory floor. He demanded order. Ignoring the desperate warnings of botanists, his managers planted the rubber trees exactly as they would place workers on an assembly line, shoulder to shoulder in tight, perfect rows. In the wild, rubber trees grow far apart to hide from pests, but here, crammed together, they became an all-you-can-eat buffet for nature.
The result was a biological massacre. A fungus known as leaf blight spread through the plantation with the speed of a wildfire. The leaves turned black, withered, and fell like ash. As if the fungal apocalypse wasn't enough, legions of lace-wing caterpillars marched in, stripping the dying trees to the bone. The jungle was fighting back against American efficiency, and it was winning. The company frantically tried to build a second site called Belterra, but the biological enemy was already inside the gates.
But let us pause and imagine a terrifying alternative reality. What if Ford had succeeded? If he had invested his millions into creating a genetically modified super tree back in the 1930s, the Amazon today would be unrecognizable. The deforestation crisis we worry about now would have started 50 years earlier. Instead of a vibrant ecosystem, the rainforest would have been bulldozed into a giant, silent monoculture plantation.
Picture a green desert stretching for thousands of miles. No jaguars, no birds, just endless, sterile rows of patented trees, kept alive by a constant rain of heavy chemicals to kill the caterpillars. Fordlandia could have become the first true corporate state, where company policy overruled the laws of Brazil, and where nature was fully enslaved by the assembly line. If you love exploring these dark twists of history, hit that subscribe button right now, because the real story is often scarier than fiction. Fortunately for the planet, the project collapsed. By 1945, Ford sold the land back to Brazil for pennies, losing the modern equivalent of $300 million. He never even visited the city he built. Today, a rusty water tower with the Ford logo still rises above the canopy, a lonely tombstone marking the spot where an industrial giant tried to force nature to punch a time clock, and nature simply said no.
Let us pause the history lesson for a moment and look at the terrifying potential of what almost happened. We tend to laugh at Fordlandia as a failure of agriculture, but we ignore that it was a near success in something far more dangerous: political independence. Deep within the contract Ford signed was a clause that could have changed the world map. He agreed to pay the Brazilian government 7% of all profits. In exchange, Fordlandia was inching toward a status known as extraterritoriality.
This means the plantation would have effectively become a sovereign state within a state, a corporate country. Imagine a place where the CEO is also the president, the judge, and the police chief. Henry Ford, the man who publicly hated monopolies in business, had paradoxically created the most rigid monopoly on human life ever seen. If this legal precedent had solidified, the company rules would have legally superseded the laws of Brazil. We are not just talking about working hours. We are talking about total control over biology and morality. The ban on alcohol and tobacco, the prohibition of dogs, the mandatory diets, and the strictly segregated swimming pools, separated by gender, would not just be company policy, they would be the supreme law of the land. It would have created a blueprint for a world where your employer owns not just your labor, but your private life, your home, and your civil rights.
Now, visualize an alternative 1940s where the rubber tree survived. To fight the fungus, Ford would have undoubtedly poured millions into early genetic modification. He would have pioneered GMO trees decades before the rest of the world, turning the Amazon basin into a sterile, genetically uniform factory floor. The deforestation crisis we face today would have started 50 years earlier on an industrial scale, fueled by American efficiency.
In this alternate reality, Fordlandia becomes the model for the future. Other giants like Rockefeller or Carnegie might have bought their own slices of nations. We could be living in a world today where tech giants do not just have headquarters, but sovereign territories with their own armies and laws. Fordlandia failed as a farm, but as an idea, it remains a haunting ghost of a corporate utopia that almost became a totalitarian reality.
By 1945, the dream was officially dead. Henry Ford II sold the entire territory back to the Brazilian government for a measly $250,000. To put that in perspective, the Ford Motor Company had poured $20 million into the jungle. In today's money, that is over $300 million simply evaporated into the humid air. But the most bitter detail of this entire saga is personal. Henry Ford himself, the man who tried to tame the Amazon from his office in Michigan, never set foot in Fordlandia, not even once. Yet the jungle did not completely swallow the town. Fordlandia is not a typical ghost town today. Several thousand people still live in those original Midwestern bungalows, maintaining a strange hybrid existence. A rusted water tower with the faded Ford logo still watches over the trees like a tombstone. And here is a fascinating twist. The locals still use the original American fire hydrants, stamped with 1930s dates. They claim these century-old iron relics work better than the modern infrastructure in neighboring Brazilian cities. It is a functional museum of a failed utopia.
But as we look back at the rust and the vines, we should probably breathe a sigh of relief. Imagine a world where Fordlandia had actually succeeded. It would have likely turned the Amazon rainforest into a tropical Detroit. The industrial conquest of nature would have started 50 years earlier, replacing diverse ecosystems with endless, silent rows of rubber trees and smoking factories. The total failure of Henry Ford actually saved the lungs of the planet from an accelerated death by assembly line. Today, those stubborn, rusty hydrants serve as a harmless monument to a dangerous idea. They remind us that while you can ship a factory to the ends of the earth, you cannot simply manufacture nature. The jungle defeated the machine, and in the end, the silence of the Amazon proved to be louder than the roar of American engines.